Kita bersyukur Allah Ta'ala dapat bersama-sama pada tengah hari ini dalam majlis pelancaran buku Palestin Sejarah 4 Ribu Tahun, iaitu satu terjemahan kepada buku Palestin 4,000 Years History yang ditulis oleh penulis yang berada di atas pentas pada sini, itu Profesor Nur Masalha daripada United Kingdom. Beliau berasal dari Palestin. Jadi di atas pentas ini juga kita ada Puan Sri Norma Hashim, iaitu pengasas kepada Hashim Sani Center for Palestine Studies dan juga setiausaha atau bendahari kepada Viva Palestina, yang di mana Hashim Sani Center adalah bekerjasama dengan Biblio untuk menerbitkan buku yang diterjemahkan ini. Jadi sebelum kita menjemput Profesor Nur Masalha untuk memberikan penerangan tentang buku itu, saya akan menemu bual Puan Sri tentang buku ini dan juga tentang pelancaran ini, dan saya mulakan Puan Sri. Boleh bercakap bahasa Inggeris atau bahasa Melayu?
I think sebab Profesor Nur dia tak faham bahasa Melayu, kita cakap bahasa Inggeris.
Alright. Puan Sri Norma, why is today's launch of this book very, very important and significant?
This book is important because for many, many years now, the history of Palestine has been dominated by Western narratives and Western powers. So this launch of this book allows the indigenous people of Palestine to reclaim their voices, and it restores the voices of the Palestinians, and it gives an authentic history of Palestine to the public.
Okay, thank you. And Prof. Nur Masalha is very well known over there in Palestine as well as in the UK, but he may not be that well known among Malaysian public. So can you please introduce, say something about the background of the writer Prof. Nur Masalha?
Prof. Nur Masalha is a highly regarded Palestinian historian, born in the Galilee in the 1948 lands, and a long-time scholar at universities in the United Kingdom. He's a leading figure in efforts to decolonize Palestinian history, and has dedicated his career to documenting the Nakba, exposing structures of settler colonialism, and debunking Zionist narratives that create a false history of Palestine. Professor Nur writes not only as an academic, but as someone whose life and heritage is rooted in the land. He's a prolific writer. He has written many books, I can't remember how many, and has a forthcoming book called The Ancient Cities and Global Trade of Palestine, a 7,000-year history. So he has gone back even further back.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Puan Sri. Now, Prof. Nur, welcome to Malaysia. I hope you have find Malaysia very interesting and enjoyable your stay here so far. Now, can you please tell us what was the main motivation for you to write this fantastic book? Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Professor Nazari, and thank you so much, Norma. And thank you all for having me here. It's really very exciting for me here to be in Malaysia for the first time in my life. It's such a fascinating country. Also to see one of my books actually in the Malay language. I know you used to write from right to left, and we in Arabic also write from right to left in the old Jawi. But I can see this is from left to right. And for me personally, I write from in both directions, and it's important to have it. So an awful lot of my books, early books, are written in Arabic, translated into English, but now I write in English, translated into this one, 4,000-year history. It's perhaps one of my most famous books. It came in 2018. It was published first in Arabic, in English, and then in Arabic. And then I discovered it was published in Bangladesh without permission in 2019, straight away. nicked it. But I said, I don't mind. The book now is in Portuguese. It's going to be in Spanish in Mexico, Portuguese in Brazil, in Spanish in Mexico. It's going to be in Turkish. It's going to be in Polish. It will be in Korean, I think. It will be in Greek. It will be in many languages. And this is for the first time I've got a book which is, if you like, global. And it's really an interesting book to see how my work itself actually started from working on modern history. I was trained as a modern historian, working on modern Palestine. I published many books on the Palestinian Nakba, on the oral history of Palestine. I also, for many, many years, I supervised PhD students in Britain, and I examined PhD students in Britain. And I also realized that 99% of my PhD students, or the PhD students I examined, they were working on modern Palestine, the last 100 years. So I said to people, what's happening to the last 4,000 years? We have got some of the oldest cities on earth. Palestine is located right at the heart of these ancient civilizations, the so-called cradles of the civilizations, between Mesopotamia and Egypt. These were among the earliest civilizations. Also, these civilizations invented writing. Ancient Iraq, Mesopotamia invented writing. The Egyptian invented the hieroglyphics about 5,000 years ago. But very few people know that Palestine invented the alphabet. And now we're all using the alphabet. It was ancient Palestine, it's called Proto-Canaanite alphabet. It was invented about roughly 5,200 years ago, and it was given to the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians gave it to the Greeks, and the Greeks gave it to Latin, and Latin gave it to English, and the English gave it to Malay, modern Malay. Also, the Phoenicians gave it to the Arabic and Aramaic. So everyone, with the exception of China and Japan, used the alphabet. And very few people know that the alphabet was actually invented in Palestine. It's the story of the sequel. You can find this in the sequel. I'm not going to go through the sequel, but this is part of my... I think one of the reasons why actually I decided I want to focus on the long history of Palestine, because the Zionists are dominated ancient history of Palestine, and they are reinventing it, they are distorting it, they are stealing it, they are renaming. When the Israelis took over Palestine, most of Palestine, 80% of it, in 1948, they changed 5,000 names of cities and valleys and mountains. They tried to Hebrewize everything. And people don't realize that the Israelis are systematically changing our history, claiming it, inventing it, Hebrewizing it. Even the UNESCO itself is using the Israeli terms for Palestine now. The UNESCO, which is supposed to be looking after indigenous cultures, is using the Hebrew name for some of our old cities and old towns. And I mean, if I was very rich, I would have taken the UNESCO to court in Paris. But I'm not very rich, so I write books here. So I think our ancient history, our ancient cities are among the oldest cities of the world. Very few people don't realize that Jericho is perhaps the oldest city in the world, 10,000 years ago. Gaza is about 5,000 years ago. These are famous cities, cities of global trade, of spices. And people know Palestine as a holy land, as a religious place. But in fact, Palestine, ancient Palestine, was so famous, and everyone wrote about it. From Herodotus 2,500 years ago to Shakespeare 500 years ago, everyone wrote about Palestine. It was one of the most famous places on earth. So I'm trying to reclaim that history back. And I think if we Palestinians don't do it, and I keep telling the Palestinians, we need to write the history of Palestine. We shouldn't wait for outsiders to do it for us. If we don't do it, the Israelis will do it, and the Israelis will distort it. So that's my drive to try to reclaim the heritage of Palestine, the history of Palestine, based on facts, based on evidence, based on archaeological discoveries.
So how long was the process of writing this book? the book is 4,000 in history, but how long did you take to write this history?
Well, it took time. I think initially I wrote an article, a very long article, in about 2016. And I noticed people actually were very fascinated. A lot of people did. I did publish it online. A lot of people did access that article. So I noticed the article was so attracting attention, I decided to write a book after that. And also I realized that the idea of Palestine is a very old idea. It's not a new idea. The concept, the geography. For instance, the first people to mention Palestine were 3,200 years ago. And we see this in ancient Egyptian sources. If you go to Egypt, have you been to Egypt? Anyone has been to Luxor in Egypt? You haven't been to Egypt. Next time you go to Egypt, you should go to the new Egyptian museum and you should go to Luxor. And we can see the first time the Egyptians mentioned Palestine was about roughly 3,300 years ago during Ramses II, the Pharaoh, and Ramses III. So it's one of these old names. And then I kept digging and digging and digging. And the book actually begins with tracing the name Palestine. The word Palestine, where does it come from? So it's not a new name, it's an old name, and it's going on thousands and thousands of years. And many authors mention Palestine and describe a country called Palestine. So really I begin with the name, and then I begin with the geography, and then I begin with the way Palestine evolved into provinces, an official name, and so forth and so forth. So I think it's one of these books no one has written. It's one of these books people should have written it dozens of years ago.
Okay. For me, the most important aspect of this book is to uncover the lie of the Zionists when they say that Palestine, they didn't call it Palestine, of course, they call it, they term it a land without people for people without land. So that was the mantra that they used in order to encourage the European Jews to move over to Palestine, saying that there's nobody staying there, which is totally untrue. So that uncovering of the lie, the terrible lie of the Zionists, really undermined their arguments for their claim to the land. So how did they respond to your book?
Well, the Zionists try to ignore it. Usually they try to ignore it. If they can't ignore it, if the world focus on this book, and there's a lot of international focus on this book, the Zionists begin to respond to it and begin to critique it and begin to claim, oh, this is a counter-narrative to the Zionist narrative. But in fact, the Zionist propaganda, a land without a people, is so stupid and it's so ridiculous, the lie, because the idea that you would have a country by the Mediterranean, the country which is part of the cradles of civilization, being an empty country without civilization is so absurd, is so ridiculous, is so nonsensical. If you go to the Middle Ages, Palestine on the map, if you look at the maps of Europe, European maps of Palestine in the Middle Ages, they put Palestine and Jerusalem at the center of the earth. The writing about Palestine is so famous. Herodotus, who was the first Greek historian to write global history, wrote about Palestine. 2,500 years ago, he visited Palestine, he described it in details, he described its cities and towns, he described its religions. Shakespeare, one of the most famous playwrights, 500 years ago, Shakespeare wrote a play called Othello. Othello, a very famous play, 500 years ago, and he wrote it in London in English to English audiences. Have you been to London? Have you been to the Globe Theatre? He wrote it there for the Globe Theatre for ordinary people. He talks about Palestine, and he talks about Othello, who was a Muslim commander who fell in love with a local woman called Desdemona. And Shakespeare, being a dramatist and being sensational, he described Desdemona falling in love with Othello, and he says Desdemona will go on foot all the way from Venice, the setting of the play, to Palestine on foot. Of course, you can't go on foot. You have to take a boat. He will go to Palestine just to, Shakespeare dramatizing, to kiss the lips of Othello. Now, this is Shakespeare being a dramatist. But it shows Palestine was so famous in London 400 years ago. Shakespeare didn't have to describe where is Palestine. Everyone in the audience, like you, everyone sitting in the theater, knew exactly where is Palestine 400 years ago. And it was a famous place. Every English writer, 300 years ago, Edward Gibbon, the famous British historian, wrote about Palestine, describing Palestine one of the most famous countries in the world. So this idea of a land without a people is one of the most stupidest idea, and it's just ridiculous. Because at the time, the British had hundreds of books talking about Palestine. No one talked about Israel. Israel is a new creation. Palestine is an ancient place, ancient country with ancient history, ancient cities.
Okay.
And this is where my next book about the global trade, how the global trade in spices from India, from Indonesia, and maybe from Malaysia, global trade in silk came from the Indian Ocean to the Yemen, through Palestine, to Gaza, to Europe. This is a long history of trade.
Okay. The book, you can hold it up there. Look, it's very thick, right? And can be very intimidating for people, especially for Generation Z, who likes to watch TikToks. Is there any video summary of the book, which is available for people to know, so that they can then, after watching the video, they can then be interested to read this very thick book?
Yeah. Well, the book can be, it's an audio book also. You can have it audio, you can listen to it in the gym. The book is also being summarized by some people using AI now. If you go to AI, you can have a number of summaries. Some of them are good summaries, by the way. So I'm not afraid of AI. Maybe some people might abuse AI, but AI can be useful as a tool, by the way. It gives you some really sharp summaries of some of the ideas of the books. So if you are a long reader, you can read these books in stages. If you're an academic, you can read it chapter by chapter. Someone told me he spent 3 months reading it, every week reading a little bit and try to digest it. If you're an academic, if you're a student, you might need textbook. You need the details. If you want sharp summaries, you can go for AI and have some excellent summaries. So you've got different kind of versions of the book. And it does help, I think the internet does help to globalize things now.
Yeah, but of course, we want to encourage people to read this book in Malay. Otherwise, we'll be undermining the strategy of, business strategy of Biblio. So we want people to buy the Malay translation of the book. That's the reason why we're having this book launch. So now, I want to go back to Puan Sri Norma. Why is this Malay translation of the book very, very important?
I think actually I can speak in Malay a bit as well. Sebagai aktivis, kita tak boleh jadi aktivis tanpa kita boleh jadi aktivis dengan slogan dan emosi saja. Kita kena ada aktivis dengan ilmu. So this book is important because it allows access to everybody on the history of Palestine, and it's a serious study from an authentic voice.
Dan kenapakah cerita berkenaan dengan Palestin ini adalah sangat penting kepada masyarakat Melayu khususnya? How does it resonate with the Malay world?
Actually for us, the Malay-speaking world is about 300 million people. So this is why I think the translation in Malay is important. Because you have 300 million people who can access this book and this knowledge in this book. And I think we all owe it to ourselves, even as Muslims, that we should know the history of Palestine and Al-Aqsa. And Professor Noor has gone back thousands of years in history to prove to us the importance of this land. So I think that especially when you have a book like this, it gives you a historical understanding, and then you can appreciate how Palestinians have lived and how they have resisted and why it's important for them to stay on the land.
And so what do you think will be the impact of this book, of the translation of this book, the impact? What do you think?
I hope, inshallah, that people will use this book and do study groups. They will discuss this on radio, in study circles, even in Usrah groups. I think we owe it to ourselves that we expand our knowledge. We cannot just be based on emotion and pity, and that's not what the Palestinians need. Palestinians need people to understand why they are the indigenous people of this land and why it's important for us to support them always.
Any final words?
Yes, I think history and memory, especially memory, whether it's individual memory or collective memory, is fundamental to our identity in Palestine, but it's also in Malaysia. Your history is fundamental to your identity. People with no history, they have no identity. Also people with no history, they have no future, in my opinion. So history is important to our identity now, but also important to our identity in the future. And the fact that we are not on our own. You know, we inherited history from our ancestors. My grandparents used to tell us about the past, and we need to also, you know, give this history to the future generations. You know, we are all here. We are a custodian. We're not controlling the reality. We have obligation to give our children and grandchildren also this story. And it's fundamental for the way human beings actually develop their identity, past, present, and future. So we also need to think about the future and how to thrive in the future. And thank you so much for being good listeners. And do buy the book, by the way.
Any final word from Puan Sri?
No, I think as Malaysian as well, we used to be colonized, and we know what it's like when someone takes over our land and tries to narrate their own version of it. So we all have our own culture, and this is an important book. So I hope everyone will read it.
Okay, thank you. We have extra time left, right? Dr. Ahmad is here. Dr. Ahmad Masud. Do you want to ask Dr. Ahmad to say something?
Do you want to ask
because
any questions?
Any question from any audience? And Dr. Ahmad, you want to add something? You are most welcome to come to the stage and do some. Kita dah masa. Buat apa, Ustaz?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Ahmed Masood. I'm a Palestinian writer as well as Noor in here. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I suppose, like, if I can ask one question in here, it would be, why do you think now this book is very important? Why now? Why do you think it's relevant? Why should people read it right now rather than like a year ago or 2 years ago, for example?
Yes, I think the genocide in Gaza makes things very urgent for us. The Israelis are not just committing genocide, but also they're looting the archaeology of Gaza. Thousands of items have been looting from Palestinian museums in Gaza. And I think if we go back to 1948, the Israelis also looted thousands of books, thousands of places. So I think there is a kind of urgency to try to preserve that history of Gaza and try to reclaim and recover some of these items being looted in Gaza. And I think the genocide makes things much more urgent for us to look after the heritage of Palestine, to try to recover and reclaim some of its heritage. It is essential to draw some sort of lines, some sort of threads between what happened in 1948, the destruction of Palestine, or 80% of Palestine in 1948, the looting of Palestinian archives, the Hebrewisation of Palestinian place names, and the fact so that the urgency now is even much more greater, and we can all do it. We can all chip in. We can all not just buy the books, but tell the stories. So I do urge you, each one of you, to use the internet, to use the social media, not just to publicize this book, but to expose the crimes of Israel in Gaza. So I think you're not passive. Many of us are activists. Many of us in Malaysia can chip into the BDS movement, can use the social media. I think a lot of young Palestinians are doing a lot of help now to try to publicize these historical places in Gaza. It is important to emphasize that Gaza is one of the most ancient, most developed places on earth in antiquity. It was a city of spices. It was a city of culture. It was a city of learning. Gaza had a very famous philosophical school about 2,000 years ago where people came to study in Gaza. We need to tell these stories about Gaza. And I think, although it's traumatic for us Palestinians to see Gaza in such a difficult situation, in fact, we can all be active. We can all contribute. Us in Malaysia, us in London, us in Palestine. We're not just passive observers. We can do our bit, all of us, to recover that heritage of Palestine, to publicize it, and to inspire hope and resistance among Palestinians and among people who are fighting against anti-colonial and Israeli colonial horrendous genocide in Gaza has to be exposed.
Terima kasih. Thank you very much, Prof. Noor. Terima kasih, Puan Sri Norma. Jadi kita harap semua yang berada di sini akan berusaha untuk membantu mempublisitikan buku ini. Pastikan ianya dibaca oleh sebanyak mungkin, seramai mungkin masyarakat Malaysia. Kalau boleh dijadikan buku teks di sekolah-sekolah, sama ada sekolah, mungkin sekolah menengah kot, dan juga di universiti-universiti, supaya kefahaman masyarakat Malaysia tentang isu Palestin adalah mantap dan tidak dikaburi oleh fakta-fakta yang dibawa masuk oleh Zionis untuk menggelirukan kita semua. Jadi sekian, terima kasih kita ucapkan kepada semua. Sekian, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, dan saya serahkan balik majlis kepada pengelola.